Walls of Jericho. When the people of Israel entered the land of Canaan, Joshua was their leader, a man chosen by God who commanded, "Look, I have set the land before you, go in and possess it." Canaan was flowing with milk and honey. But this beautiful land was filled with the wickedness of the Canaanite people who lived there. In cities like Jericho, people worshipped evil, magic, and sacrificed their children to idols. God said these things were abominations and the people who did them must be driven out. That was to be Joshua's task, and it was a tremendous challenge. But Joshua had God's promise, "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Be strong and very courageous." So Joshua, at God's command, led his people to the plains of Jericho. The great city of Jericho shut its gates when the inhabitants heard the Israelites were approaching. They were afraid of these people and hated their miracle-working God. But instead of changing their ways, Jericho prepared to resist. They gathered together their weapons and prepared for war. Day and night the men of Jericho kept watch from the top of the walls that surrounded the city. Near the city of Jericho, Joshua looked at the wall. It stood tall, thick, and strong. He knew no human power could break them down. But Joshua remembered, God had said, "No one will be able to stand before you all the days of your life." And as Joshua looked to the Lord for help, a strange thing happened. There stood a man with a sword drawn in his hand. And when Joshua asked, "Are you for us, or for our enemies?" the man said, "I am the captain of the army of the Lord. Take your shoes off, for the place where you are standing is holy." Joshua obeyed with humble worship. He listened carefully to all the instructions the Lord gave him. When Joshua returned to camp, he called together his men. These men of Israel had sworn to obey Joshua as they had Moses. But as they listened to Joshua's orders, the men of Israel realized that obedience would test not only their loyalty to their leader, but their faith in the Lord as well. No soldiers have ever heard orders such as Joshua's men heard from their leader. But the men were encouraged when Joshua told them, "The Lord said the walls of Jericho would fall down and every man would go straight into the city." So the men of Israel prepared to obey. Inside the walls of Jericho the soldiers shouted, "The Israelites are coming! To the walls! To the walls!" Every man hurried to his place. From the top of the wall, Jericho's men of war watched intensely as the Israelites approached. First came armed men, then something that looked very strange in the ranks of an army. 7 priests were blowing their trumpets continually, and following them was a mysterious object hidden beneath rich blue coverings. What could it be? Only the people of Israel knew it was the Ark of the Lord, and it was there to remind them that the Lord went before them, and victory was the Lord's. The Israelites marched around the city in a quiet and peaceful way. Not a single word was spoken. The only sounds heard were the steady tramp of marching feet and the endless blast of the priests' trumpets. The people of Jericho stood and watched in amazement as the long column of Israelites disappeared among the hills and returned to their camp. Jericho's fighting men were troubled and very uneasy. What could it mean? Was it some kind of trick? On the second day, the Israelites did exactly the same thing. The priests carried the Ark of the Lord around the city, 7 priests blowing their trumpets before it, and armed men marching in front and the rear. The Israelites marched once around the city, then returned to camp without anyone saying a single word. Every day for 6 days the same thing happened, and every day the people of Jericho watched and waited. Some were still fearful and troubled, remembering the things they had heard about Israel's Almighty God. But others began to mock the foolish Israelites marching around and around the strong walls of Jericho, blowing their trumpets, and carrying a mysterious box. Anyone could see they'd never be able to get into the city. On the morning of the 7th day, the Israelites marched around the city as before. But instead of returning to their camp, they marched around a second time, and again, and again. 7 times the Israelites marched around the city. At the end of the 7th time, every man stopped, and faced the walls, completely surrounding the city of Jericho. Then suddenly the trumpets stopped. Every man waited for the Lord's appointed signal. After a long blast of the trumpets, Joshua cried out, "Shout! The Lord has given you the city." While the people of Jericho looked on, not knowing that their end had come, the people of Israel raised a great shout of victory. And the walls of the city fell. The Israelites went straight in to attack the city, just as the Lord had said. And they destroyed all the evil that was in the city as God had commanded. After that time, wherever they went in the Promised Land, the Israelites had victory as long as they had faith in the Lord and obeyed His commands. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Share and leave a comment. Subscribe.